Amina Amna, Juan or Quat, distinguished guests, all the young people in the room. I'd like just to say I'm very pleased to be here. If I can, I'd like to welcome you all. I know that that's been done. My name is Abdalla Ernist. I'm a professor at Shoreline Community College in Seattle, where I teach multicultural studies. And I was a student of Ustaz Mahmoud, and have been a student of Ustaz Mahmoud since I went to the Sudan in 1977 until I returned home in 1986 and up to this moment. I do feel, however, that the teachings of Ustaz Mahmoud are the essence of spirituality and religion, the essence of it. And one of the things that I learned was that it's not about talk, it's about action. Thinking what you will, saying what you think, and doing what you say was the definition that Ustaz gave us of a free human being. And sometimes I find myself not necessarily doing what I say or saying what I think. And so because of that, when I was asked if I was coming to this event, I said, yes, I'd like to, but I don't want to speak. And the other end of the phone went silent. He said, no, just come. Then when I arrived here on Friday, I was told that, well, you have an interview with NPR tomorrow morning. And I said, well, that's fine. Who with? And they said, Noor Muhammad Hamid, who you will hear from shortly. And so it was a very nice interview. We did it as a team. The woman who interviewed us from the local Iowa NPR did an excellent job of asking questions, and I understand that some people will have a chance to hear that interview. So then I started to wonder. And so yesterday, I asked my brother, Muhammad Ali Malik, who I'm staying with, I said, Muhammad, what's expected of me when I attend the celebration tomorrow? Muhammad, in his way, just told me, just sit in the audience, you know, enjoy the show, and you might have to say a word or two, you know. And then I realized that I actually was expected to speak, and it's an honor really to be here. It's an honor to be here. The task at hand is an easy one when it comes to celebrating Ustaz Mahmoud Muhammad Taha. The difficulty of the task is trying to capture who he was so that we can begin to understand what we are celebrating, the significance of this celebration. And I'm sure each of us struggles with that on a daily basis to try to understand who was this human being that we came in contact with for this period of time in our lives. We know some of the history, that he was born in Sudan along the River Nile in Rufaa, beautiful town, in about 1909. By the time he was 5, we know that his mother had passed away, and by the time he was 10, his father had passed away. And we know that he went on to distinguish himself as a young person, as someone who was exceptional. I heard a story once told by his sister that when he moved from Hasahisa back to Rufaa, that his uncle had a horse, and that he and some of the young boys used to take a hair from the horse's tail, and they would trap a small bird with it and allow the bird to fly around while they were holding the horse's tail. And the uncle told him to stop doing it because the horse was losing its hairs on his tail. But you know, being young boys, I can imagine how much fun that was. They continued to do it. And so one day his uncle noticed that his horse barely had a tail. And so he was calling for his nephew Mahmoud. And Ustaz's sister saw that the uncle was angry, so she went to him and said, "Uncle, he had nothing to do with it. I took the hairs off that horse's tail." And the uncle, not being able to punish his little niece, let the matter go. When she relayed that story to her brother, who was a very young child at the time, I'm not sure how old, but quite young, you can imagine, he said something to her like, "Thank you, but you realize that telling a lie is not the right thing to do." And he said, "If I didn't think that our uncle would be angry and punish you, I would go and tell him that I, in fact, was partly responsible for taking those hairs off the tail." So that was Ustaz Mahmoud, to give you an idea that at a young age, he had some exceptional sensibilities related to the human condition. And those sensibilities manifested all throughout his life. He was brilliant. I mean, that word doesn't capture him, but he was that. Graduated from a colonial college called Gordon College, now the University of Khartoum, with a degree in engineering. He went to work as an engineer during the time of colonialism, during the time that the Sudanese were being oppressed by the British, rendered as second-class citizens in their own country. And Ustaz Mahmoud was offended by the attitude of the British. And so he developed an oppositional party starting in the late 1930s. He graduated from college in 36, and in the late 30s he had an oppositional party to the colonial government. And it was really the only and first oppositional party to the colonial government in Sudan. And people started joining this party. He refused to sign an oath of allegiance to the government. He was in prison. But the movement that he had already started was so strong that the British intended to keep him in prison for a year. They could only hold him for 50 days. He continued to move against the British oppression of the Sudanese. He was imprisoned again a year later in 1946, and it was during his imprisonment that he realized that God had put him in prison and that there was a purpose for him being there. And he started to dedicate himself to fasting and prayer. 2 years in prison. And while he was in prison, he also conducted himself in a way that later manifests in his life. He didn't stand up for the British when they came to his cell. He wouldn't wear the uniform of a first-class prisoner, someone who was educated. He insisted upon wearing the uniform of third-class citizen. He took prisoner. He took pride in that, not being above people. Anyway, another 3 years in seclusion when he gets out of prison, and he spends his time still praying and fasting and treating people as human beings. I've heard stories about his prayer. I heard that people in Rufaa would see him praying Dhuhr, the noon prayer, and go to the market. And when they returned from the market, he was still praying Dhuhr prayer. Obviously, absolutely committed to this methodology which he had perceived in prison. That methodology being the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Ustaz Mahmoud had a realization about Islam. He came in that Sufi tradition which understood that submitting to Allah is going to lead you towards the truth. And so he did that with all his heart and with all his soul. he came to the realization that people have it wrong. He came to the realization that there is a dilemma in the Islamic world, and Muslims have a fundamental misunderstanding. And it's not a minor thing when you think about 9/11, this fundamental misunderstanding. It's not a minor thing. He said that understanding is that Islam has one level of revelation. He said, in fact, that there are two messages in Islam. Two messages there. And that if we dedicate ourselves to the path of the Prophet Muhammad in his personal practice, we have a methodology that can allow us to improve ourselves as human beings. And if we take the principles and teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, we can develop a community that will support us in that endeavor to become free human beings. And he called that the second message of Islam, and people started to flock towards that message. I came upon it when I was in Hawaii. Some of you know the story, but I met a Sudanese student who was studying agriculture at the University of Hawaii, and he told me, when I asked him about Islam in Sudan, that there was a man there who had ideas that were modern and that made sense in today's context. He said, in fact, I believe every word that I've read. I've read all his books, and I believe every word that I've read of it. And this impressed me. I said, I've got to meet that man. And so I came with Salman to Sudan in '77, and my main purpose was to meet Ustaz Mahmoud Muhammad Taha. And when I met him, I was overwhelmed with what I saw. And what I saw was a human being. What I saw was a man, but what I saw was a human being. He had that strength that is attractive to a young man to see in another man. He had also a compassion and a sensitivity that I had never seen in another man or woman in my life. And that compassion manifests itself in many ways. Sensitivity, personal relationship with each one of his followers. Most of the Republican brothers and sisters, if you ask them, will tell you that they have a personal relationship with Ustaz Mahmoud Muhammad Taha. And I probably wouldn't be too far off if I suggest that most of them think that their relationship with him was more personal than everybody else's. He had that ability to make you feel special. I saw during the trial, some of you saw the trial there. I had the opportunity to go inside the courtroom one day. I snuck in behind a British journalist who happened to be a colleague of mine at the University of Khartoum. He went in with his card, and I just said, I'm with him, and so they let me in the court. And what I saw was Ustaz sitting behind those bars, calm. I finally caught his eye, and he sort of looked at me, and I don't know if it was a smile, but it made me feel good. But he did something that day that I want to share with you. Now, he's on trial for his life, and he knows exactly what the outcome is going to be. He's on trial for his life, and he knows exactly what the outcome is going to be. And I could substantiate that to those of you if you'd like. During the course of that, the courtroom was full of people, and there was one of the Republican sisters who was standing against the wall. And Ustaz Mahmoud motioned to one of the brothers, I believe it was Awad al-Karim, Ali Musa, if I'm not mistaken. You can check that. And whispered something to him. Awad came over next to that cage, and he whispered something to him, and I watched, and Awad went over and whispered something to one of the brothers who was sitting, and then motioned to the sister to come sit down. And so I said, look at this. This is amazing that this man on trial for his life is concerned about one of the sisters who must have some discomfort standing. I came to find out later that she was expecting. She was about 1 month or so into her pregnancy. So things like that make you pause and think. They make you also realize that Ustaz Mahmoud was a man who had the credentials to bring us something new. You saw him at his trial. I mean, he's telling the judge that I'm not cooperating with your court, but I have this to say to you. It's already in writing because my clear writing is what brought me here in the first place. He's in jail for over 2 years. He comes out of jail, and 1 week later, he writes the pamphlet that puts him right back into jail. And in that pamphlet, he tells the government that it's violating Islam, it's violating Sharia. He tells them that it's going to lead the country into civil war. He tells them that it's suppressing the rights of non-Muslims and that Sharia has no place. At least that interpretation of Sharia has no place in this time. He then is arrested, and at his trial, he tells the judge that the judge is being used as a tool by the executive branch of government, and that he has no intention of cooperating with any court that allows itself to be used to humiliate people, to suppress its populace, and he goes on. He then says to the judge, also, the court, speaking directly to the judge, he's telling the judge that you are technically unqualified to be trying this case. He says that to the judge in his calm voice. At the time, he's sort of rocking back and forth as he says this to him very calmly. No malice in his voice, just telling the truth. And then he sits down. And so that's another example of just how calm he was and how brave he was. And I think that from his calmness and from his courage, there's something to learn. It was mentioned earlier about that concept of human rights, and one of the things that I think we benefit from the thinking and the second message of Islam is that not only are we focused on the humanity of others, but we're also directed towards a methodology that will lead us to becoming better human beings so that we can begin to treat other people as we want to be treated ourselves. So that we can begin to, as Ustaz said, see each human being as an end in themselves and not as a means to an end. So that concept of viewing every human being as an end in themselves, whether they be male or female, or black or white, or first class or second class, or sane or insane, they're still an end in themselves. And when Ustaz talks about that, he says, in fact, the human being is a God in the making. The end that we're seeing is our Creator. He's telling us that. That's the motivation for us to become humans, and the motivation for us to build a society based upon the principles of equality that he talks about and social justice that he talks about, governed by this constitution that's going to provide for the human rights of all people, Muslim, non-Muslim, male, female, etc. And so there's something special in that. One day, I was having a conversation, and I was trying to understand the relationship between Christianity and Islam, and Judaism and Islam, and Ustaz talked about that Sufi tradition of seeing Islam as a culmination of the revelation of the one Creator since Adam. And I was still struggling with this idea of, well, why do we need something after Christ? What is really the reason for there to be a prophet to come after Christ? Because Christ said it all, you know. Love those who despitefully use you, right? Love thy neighbor as thyself. I mean, Christ said and taught those ultimate human teachings, and if people followed them, we'd be fine. So why Islam? And the understanding that I believe Ustaz Mahmoud helped me with, I know Ustaz Mahmoud helped me with, and I think one of the things that is so important in his life and in his message as I see it, is that he's saying that it's not enough to turn the other cheek when somebody slaps you on one cheek. It's a high thing to do, and most of us can't do it. I know, and people that know me know, I'm not a person who easily turns the other cheek. I'm working on it still. But that idea, Ustaz took it to another level, and he said, we have to understand why it is that this human being is slapping us, and fix the conditions that caused him to slap you. Now that's deep. That is profound. That is what we're talking about. Restructuring the environment that created the conditions that caused people to lash out at one another and to behave inhumanely. This is what his message was focused on. And to me, when you think about it, when you think about Judaism, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and Christianity with those teachings that are so lofty, we're talking about Islam as something that can connect the two. And that's really, I think, what is the beauty of Ustaz's teachings. The other thing, I guess, we got back to 9/11 a second. The whole idea about improving ourselves as human beings and fighting ourselves before we fight others. You know, and Christ said that again, right? Christ said, concern yourself. Why concern yourself with a small speck in the other person's eye when you have a big log in your own eye? Right? And so that whole idea of people being so angry and always focusing on the other and wanting to do harm to the other. And I think that the way I'm trying to, the way I'm seeing this is that this idea, if we really do embrace the idea of Ustaz's teaching, that every human being is an end in himself, and not the other, but an extension of ourselves, I think we have, again, the methodology to start moving towards focusing on our own issues and fighting that war against ourselves before we take up arms and try to do harm to other human beings. And I think that that's not just a message to Muslims, it's a message to this country right now in Iraq. I believe that if we saw the Iraqi people as Americans, or at least some sector of the American population, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing to Iraqi citizens in the name of taking them democracy. We wouldn't be doing it. But we see them as an other. And I think Israel was mentioned earlier with the Palestinians. It's the same issue there. You could go on talking about Ustaz Mahmoud. I mean, his books. He wrote to Abdul Nasser back in the 1950s. He wrote on the conflict in Iraq. I was told just yesterday he wrote a letter in 1958 suggesting that the UN intervene in Iraq and have a standing military force in Iraq because of potential threats to the world that are going to come out of Iraq in 1958. So again, his vision, his knowledge, and then his ability ultimately to practice what he said and to have the courage to die for what he believed and to leave us all without hatred, malice in our hearts is an amazing legacy. I mean, if I get nothing else out of being a student, a disciple of of El Ustaz Mahmoud Muhammad Taha is that he teaches you to love and forgive. So thank you for